The woman under the bridge was trying to save my life. I still walk that route. Every single morning. I don't know why. Maybe it's punishment. Maybe it's penance. Maybe it's because some part of me believes that if I stop walking under that bridge, I'll be admitting she's really gone. And I'm not ready for that yet. I don't think I'll ever be ready for that. My name is Marcus. I'm 6'2", 230 pounds. I spent 4 years doing private security in Atlanta, corporate buildings, gated communities, the occasional celebrity detail when the money was right. I've been trained to spot threats. I've been trained to read body language, to notice when something's off, to trust that cold feeling in the back of my skull when a situation is about to go sideways. And I missed it. For weeks, I walked right past it. I looked at her every single day and I missed it. That's what keeps me up at night. Not the gunshot. Not the blood. Not even the way her fingers went slack against my shirt. It's the fact that she was screaming for help the entire time, and I was too comfortable in my own assumptions to hear it. Let me start at the beginning. I moved to Baltimore in late October. The job was a lateral move, facility security manager for a logistics company out near the port. Decent pay, full benefits, the kind of position you take when you're 34 and tired of working contracts. I found an apartment in Fells Point, one of those old row houses that had been carved into units. 3rd floor, 1 bedroom, a window that looked out over the harbor if you leaned far enough. The commute was 22 minutes on foot. I liked walking. Always have. There's something about moving through a city on your feet that keeps you sharp. You notice things. The way the light changes block to block. The rhythm of foot traffic. The spots where people cluster and the spots they avoid. My route took me under the Harmon Street overpass every morning. It was one of those old concrete bridges that carried traffic over a set of rail lines that hadn't been active in years. The underside was tagged with graffiti, some of it genuinely good, most of it territorial nonsense. The ground was cracked asphalt littered with broken glass and fast food wrappers. There was always a smell. Damp concrete, exhaust residue, and something organic underneath it all, like the city was slowly composting itself. It wasn't a dangerous stretch. Not really. There were joggers in the morning. Dog walkers. A few commuters like me cutting through on their way to the industrial corridor. The homeless population rotated. You'd see someone camped out for a few days and then they'd move on, replaced by someone else. It was Baltimore. You learn to coexist with the geography of poverty. I noticed her on my 3rd day. She was sitting against the concrete support pillar on the east side of the overpass. Young mid-20s, maybe younger. It was hard to tell. Her hair was blonde but so matted and grimy it looked like wet straw. She wore an oversized army surplus jacket that swallowed her frame, and beneath it, a pair of sweatpants that were cut and knotted just above where her knees should have been. Because she didn't have legs. Both of them ended in rounded stumps above the knee. The fabric was tied tight around each one, and the stumps rested on a piece of flattened cardboard that she'd folded into a makeshift cushion. In front of her was a hand-lettered sign on a torn piece of corrugated box, "Spare change for food." God bless. The handwriting was shaky. The letters were uneven, like someone who wasn't used to writing in English. Or someone whose hands were too cold to hold the marker steady. I gave her $5 that first morning. She didn't look up. Just nodded. I heard her say something, "Thank you maybe," but the accent was thick and the words were almost swallowed by the traffic noise above us. The next day I gave her another $5. Same nod. Same mumbled thanks. By the end of the first week, it had become Routine. I'd approach the overpass, pull a bill from my wallet, drop it into the coffee can she kept next to her sign, and keep walking. Sometimes I'd say morning. Sometimes she'd look up. Mostly she kept her eyes on the ground. I told myself I was being a good person. That this was the decent thing to do. That in a city full of people who stepped over the suffering like it was just another crack in the sidewalk, at least I was stopping. I didn't ask her name. I didn't ask how she lost her legs. I didn't ask where she slept when it rained or who was looking out for her. I dropped my money and I kept walking, and I felt good about myself for the remaining 19 minutes of my commute. That's the part that eats at me. 3 weeks in, something changed. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my early days. I had to be on site by 6 for the shift change briefing. So I was walking under the overpass at 5:15 in the morning. It was still dark. The streetlight on the east side had been out for days, and the only illumination came from the headlights of trucks passing on the road above, their beams cutting through the gaps in the bridge deck like searchlights sweeping a prison yard. She was already there. She was always already there. I'd started to wonder if she ever left that spot. I pulled out my wallet. Took out a 10 this time. It was getting colder, and I figured she could use it for a blanket or a hot meal. I leaned down to drop it in the can. And she looked up at me. I'd seen fear before. Real fear. The kind that lives in the eyes of someone who knows they're about to be hurt and can't do anything about it. I saw it once on a job, a woman in a parking garage who'd been followed by a man with a knife. I got there in time. I handled it. But the look in her eyes before I intervened, that animal terror, that helplessness, I never forgot it. This was worse. This wasn't just fear. This was desperation. This was someone trying to communicate an entire universe of danger through a single look because they couldn't use words. Her eyes were wide, the whites visible all the way around, and they weren't looking at me. They were looking past me. Over my shoulder. Toward the other side of the overpass. Then she dropped her gaze. Fast. Like a switch had been flipped. She went back to staring at the ground, her shoulders hunched, her body small and still. I stood there for a moment. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. That cold feeling, the one I'd been trained to trust, was screaming. I turned around slowly, casually, like I was just checking the time or looking at the graffiti. The other side of the overpass was shadows and concrete. The rail embankment rose up behind it, overgrown with dead brush and trash. If someone was standing in that brush, in the dark, I wouldn't have been able to see them. But I felt them. You know that sensation? When you're being watched? It's not mystical. It's not supernatural. It's your limbic system picking up on cues your conscious mind hasn't processed yet. A reflection. A sound. A disturbance in the pattern of the environment. Your body knows before your brain does. Someone was watching me from the other side of that bridge. I turned back around and kept walking. My pace was steady, controlled. I didn't run. Running triggers pursuit. I kept my hands visible, my posture relaxed, my breathing even. But inside, every alarm I had was firing. When I got to work, I sat in my office for 10 minutes staring at the wall, trying to figure out what had just happened. The next morning, I approached the overpass with a different awareness. I was scanning. Checking sightlines. Noting the positions of shadows and the angles where someone could conceal themselves. Old habits, but they'd never felt more necessary. She was in her usual spot. Same sign. Same coffee can. Same army jacket. I crouched down to put the money in the can. And as I did, her hand shot out and grabbed mine. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Horror. Fingers were ice cold and rough, the skin cracked and raw. She pressed something into my palm, a small square of paper, folded twice, and then released me immediately. She didn't look up. Her hand retreated back under the jacket like a turtle pulling into its shell. I closed my fist around the paper and stood up. I didn't look at it. I kept walking. I could feel the weight of that folded note in my hand like it was made of lead. I didn't open it until I was inside the logistics facility, behind a locked door, in the bathroom where no one could see my face when I read it. The note was written in a language I didn't recognize. The letters were Cyrillic Russian, maybe, or Ukrainian. The handwriting was tiny and precise, completely different from the shaky block letters on her cardboard sign. This was someone who knew how to write. Someone educated. Someone who had been reduced to sitting under a bridge with no legs and a sign that said spare change for food. I photographed the note and ran it through a translation app. The results were rough but clear enough. Do not give me money. Man is watching from other side. He see where you keep wallet. He wait for you when you alone. He make me do this. I read it 3 times. Then I read it again. He make me do this. Not I'm doing this. Not this is my hustle. He make me do this. She was being used. She was bait. Someone had placed a woman with no legs under a bridge with a sign designed to make you reach for your wallet, and they were watching from the shadows to see exactly where you kept it, how much cash you carried, and what route you took when you were alone. The rage hit me like a physical thing. It started in my chest and spread outward until my hands were shaking and my jaw ached from clenching. Not at her. Never at her. At whoever was standing in those shadows. At whatever kind of person looks at a disabled woman and sees a tool. A lure. A piece of equipment in their predatory operation. And then the rage turned inward. Because I'd been walking past her for 3 weeks. I'd been dropping money in her can and feeling righteous about it. And the whole time, she'd been a prisoner. The whole time, someone had been watching me through the dead brush on the far side of that bridge, cataloging my habits, waiting for the right moment. How many others had there been? How many people had dropped money in that can and then been followed home, jumped in a parking lot, beaten and robbed in an alley? How many of them were dead? I called the police. Non-emergency line first, because I knew how this would sound. There's a homeless woman under a bridge and she slipped me a note in Russian saying someone's using her as bait. I could hear the skepticism through the phone. The officer took my information, said they'd send someone out to do a welfare check. I called back the next day. No record of a welfare check being completed. They said they'd look into it. I called a 3rd time. This time I got a detective. He was polite but distracted. He said the area under the Harmon Street overpass was a known encampment zone and that they'd increase patrols in the area. Translation, they'd drive by once and call it done. I was on my own. That night I sat in my apartment and made a plan. The security professional in me took over the part of my brain that assesses threats and develops countermeasures. I thought about what I knew and what I didn't know. I knew someone was using her. I knew they watched from the East Embankment. I knew they were armed, or at least dangerous enough that she was terrified. I knew the police weren't going to help. What I didn't know was how many of them there were. What I didn't know was what they'd done to her, beyond the obvious, beyond the unthinkable, to keep her compliant. What I didn't know was whether she'd still be there when I went back. I made a decision that night that I've questioned every day since. I decided I was going to go back to that bridge, and I was going to end it. I prepared a decoy. Wallet. Old leather bifold I'd been meaning to throw away. I stuffed it with cut newspaper and put a 20 on top so it would look full if someone rifled through it quickly. I put it in my back left pocket, the opposite side from where I actually kept my wallet. And I loaded my Glock 19. I want to be clear about something. I have a concealed carry permit. I've logged hundreds of hours at the range. In 4 years of security work, I drew my weapon exactly twice and never fired it. I don't romanticize guns. I don't fantasize about being a hero. I'm not one of those guys who walks around hoping someone gives them an excuse. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that whoever was hiding in those shadows wasn't going to stop because I asked nicely. And I knew that the woman under the bridge, whose name I still didn't know, whose language I couldn't speak, who had risked everything to warn a stranger, was running out of time. 2 days later. Thursday. I left my apartment at 4:30 in the morning. It was still full dark. The temperature had dropped into the low 30s overnight, and the air had that raw, wet edge to it that cuts through whatever you're wearing. My breath came out in clouds. The streets were empty except for a delivery truck idling outside a convenience store and a cat that watched me from a fire escape with reflective eyes. I approached the Harmon Street overpass from the west, which was the opposite of my usual route. I wanted to come in from an angle that whoever was watching wouldn't expect. I moved along the rail embankment, staying in the tree line, using the overgrown brush for concealment. The ground was soft and wet. Dead leaves muffled my footsteps. The overpass loomed ahead of me, a dark mass against the slightly less dark sky. The broken streetlight on the east side was still out. Good. Darkness was my ally now. I reached the edge of the underpass and stopped. Listened. The world was still. No traffic above, too early even for the trucks. The only sound was the wind pushing through the dead brush and the distant, rhythmic clank of something metal swinging in the breeze. Her spot was empty. The cardboard was still there. The coffee can was on its side, a few coins scattered around it. Her sign was torn in half, the pieces fluttering against the base of the pillar. But she was gone. My stomach dropped. I felt a sick, lurching dread that started in my gut and climbed up my throat. I was too late. Whatever had been planned, whatever cycle of violence she'd been trapped in, it had moved on. She'd been relocated. Disposed of. The word hit me like a punch, disposed of, because that's how they'd think of her. Not a person. An asset that had become a liability. She'd warned me, and they'd found out, and now she was gone. I stood in the dark under that bridge and I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child. Helpless. Completely, utterly helpless. All my training, all my preparation, the loaded weapon on my hip, none of it mattered because I was standing in an empty space where a woman used to be and I didn't know where she'd gone. Then I heard it. A sound. Faint. Coming from the east side, down the embankment toward the waterfront. It could have been an animal. It could have been the wind. But it wasn't. It was a voice. A human voice, thin and broken, making sounds that weren't words anymore. Just sounds. The kind of sounds you make when you've been screaming for so long that your throat has given up on forming language and all that's left is raw noise. I moved toward it. Down the embankment. The brush tore at my jacket. The ground sloped sharply, and I had to grab at branches to keep from sliding. Below me, I could see the dark flat surface of the water, a tributary of the harbor, maybe 30 feet across, sluggish and black. The banks were littered with concrete rubble and rusted rebar and the kind of debris that accumulates in places no one cares about. The sound was coming from the water's edge. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, keeping it low, shielding it with my body. And I saw her. She was in the water. Not floating, wedged. Her body was caught between two concrete blocks that had tumbled down the bank, half submerged in the black water that lapped at her chest. Her arms were behind her back, tied, I realized, with what looked like electrical cord. Her head was tipped back, her mouth open, and the sounds coming from her were barely human. Her face was swollen. One eye was completely shut, the skin around it dark and distended. Blood ran from a cut above her hairline, mixing with the water, creating thin red threads that spun away in the current. The army jacket was gone. She was wearing a thin t-shirt, soaked through, and the cold, God, the cold. The water temperature had to be in the 40s. She'd been in there for hours, maybe longer. Her lips were blue. Her skin was the color of candle wax. I was in the water before I made the conscious decision to move. The cold hit me like electricity, every muscle in my body seized. The water was only thigh deep where she was, but the bottom was slick with algae and debris, and I nearly went under twice getting to her. I got my arms around her and lifted. She weighed nothing. She weighed absolutely nothing. It was like picking up a bundle of wet cloth. I carried her up the bank and laid her on the flattest piece of ground I could find. She was shaking violent, full-body tremors that I recognized as late-stage hypothermia. I pulled off my jacket and wrapped it around her. Her tied hands made it awkward. I couldn't get the cord off, it was wound tight and knotted, the kind of deliberate binding that's meant to cause pain. I had my phone in one hand, trying to dial 911, when she grabbed the front of my shirt. Her fingers twisted into the fabric with a strength that shouldn't have been possible in her condition. Her one good eye was locked on mine. And then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it tracked past my face to a point behind me. Over my left shoulder. Toward the top of the embankment. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. But her lips formed a shape that was unmistakable in any language. Behind you. Footsteps. Behind me. On the loose gravel of the embankment. Coming down. I didn't think. I drew. I fired. The muzzle flash lit up the embankment like a camera flash, a single frozen frame of reality. In that fraction of a second, I saw him. A man. Tall. Wearing a dark hoodie and a ski mask pulled down over his face. His right arm was extended and in his hand was a pistol, matte black, already aimed at the back of my head. He was less than 15 feet away. If she hadn't grabbed my shirt, if she hadn't looked past me, if I'd spent 2 more seconds on the phone with 911, he would have put a bullet in my skull and I never would have heard the shot. My round caught him center mass. The impact folded him backward. His gun discharged, the shot went wide, sparking off the concrete somewhere to my right, and then he was falling, sliding down the embankment in a cascade of loose gravel and dead brush. He hit the bottom and didn't move. I should have stopped. I should have checked on her. I should have called for help. I didn't. Something took over. Something dark and old and utterly beyond my control. It was rage, yes, but it was more than rage. It was every morning I'd walked past her and not seen. Every $5 I'd dropped in that can feeling good about myself while she sat there as a prisoner. Every night she'd spent under that bridge, cold and terrified and legless and alone, while this thing, used her like a piece of furniture. I walked to where he'd fallen. He was on his back. The ski mask had ridden up, exposing a pale chin and a mouth that was working, trying to form words, trying to breathe. A dark stain was spreading across the front of his hoodie. I stood over him and I fired again. And again. And again. The slide locked back on an empty magazine. The sound of the shots was still ringing in my ears, layered over a high-pitched whine that wouldn't stop. Brass casings glittered on the ground around my feet. The air smelled like copper and cordite and river water. I don't know how many times I fired. I know it was more than necessary. I know that whatever I was shooting at by the end wasn't the man on the ground anymore. It was everything he represented. Every predator I'd ever seen get away with it. Every victim I'd arrived too late to help. Every time the system had shrugged and said they'd look into it. I emptied the magazine into him and I felt nothing. Then the fog lifted. And I remembered her. I turned and scrambled back up the bank to where I'd left her. She was exactly where I'd placed her, wrapped in my jacket, lying on the cold ground. Her eye was closed now. The trembling had stopped. That was bad. The trembling stopping was very, very bad. "Hey," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Hey, stay with me. Stay with me." I got down on my knees beside her. I put my hand on her cheek. Her skin was like touching ice. I pressed 2 fingers to her throat and found a pulse, thready, irregular, barely there. Like a candle flame in a draft, guttering, about to go out. I called 911. I don't remember what I said. I know I gave them the location. I know I told them there was a shooting. I know I told them I needed an ambulance immediately. The dispatcher was calm, professional, asking questions I couldn't process. I kept saying she's dying, and the dispatcher kept saying, "Sir, help is on the way." I put the phone on speaker and set it on the ground. I took off my shirt and added it to the jacket wrapped around her. I held her hands, still bound behind her back, still tied with that electrical cord, and I tried to warm them between mine. I talked to her. I don't know what I said. Probably nonsense. Probably things like "you're going to be okay" and "hold on" and "I'm here," all the things people say when they have no power over what's happening and can't stand the silence. At some point her eye opened. The good one. The one that wasn't swollen shut. She looked at me with an expression that I will carry with me until the day I die. It wasn't fear. It wasn't pain. It was something quieter than that. Something like recognition. Like she was seeing me clearly for the first time, not as the man who dropped money in her can, not as a mark, not as a potential victim, but as the person who had come back. Her lips moved. I leaned closer. She said something in Russian. 1 word, maybe 2. I don't know what it meant. I've never had it translated. I don't think I want to know. Then her eye closed again. The paramedics arrived 11 minutes later. I know because I was watching the clock on my phone, each minute stretching into something elastic and cruel. They came down the embankment with their kits and their efficiency, and they took over, and I stepped back and let them work because there was nothing else I could do. They worked on her for a long time. Longer than I expected. I stood there in a wet undershirt, shivering, watching them apply blankets and start in 4 and check her vitals with instruments that beeped and flashed in the pre-dawn darkness. One of them looked up at his partner and said something I couldn't hear. The partner shook his head. The police arrived. 2 units. They saw the body at the bottom of the embankment and drew their weapons until I identified myself and explained what had happened. One of them secured my Glock. Another started taping off the scene. A detective showed up 20 minutes later, not the same one I'd spoken to on the phone. This one was older, tired-looking, with the resigned expression of someone who'd seen too many mornings like this one. They loaded her into the ambulance. I watched the doors close. The lights came on red and white, spinning, and the ambulance pulled away, and I stood there on the bank of that filthy urban waterway in the dark with blood on my hands and river water soaking through my pants, and I prayed. I'm not a religious man. I haven't prayed since I was 12 years old. But I prayed that morning. I prayed to whoever or whatever might be listening because I had nothing else left to offer. She was pronounced dead on arrival at Johns Hopkins Bayview. The detective told me 2 hours later. He was gentle about it. He sat me down in the back of his unmarked car and he said, "I'm sorry, Marcus. She didn't make it. Hypothermia. Blood loss. Internal injuries consistent with repeated physical trauma over an extended period." The medical examiner would later note signs of malnutrition so severe that her organ function had been compromised for months. She'd been dying long before I found her in that water. She'd been dying every day I walked past her and dropped money in a coffee can. The investigation took weeks. The man I killed was identified through fingerprints. He had a record: assault, human trafficking, felony weapons charges. He was connected to a network that operated in 4 states, preying on vulnerable people, immigrants, runaways, the disabled, and using them in various schemes. Some were forced into begging. Some were forced into worse. She was identified through dental records and a missing persons report filed 3 years earlier by a family in Odessa, Ukraine. Her name was Katerina. She was 24 years old. She had been studying mathematics at a university before she disappeared. The report didn't specify how she'd lost her legs. The investigation suggested it may not have been accidental. 24 years old. A math student. Someone's daughter. Someone's sister. Someone who had an entire life ahead of her before it was torn away by people who saw her as raw material. I was cleared of all charges. Self-defense. The detective, the older one, the tired one, shook my hand afterward and said, "You did the right thing." I nodded. I shook his hand. And then I went home and sat in my apartment in the dark for 3 days. People ask me if I regret what I did. They mean the shooting. They mean standing over a dying man and emptying a magazine into him. I don't. What I regret is everything before it. I regret not pushing harder when the police dismissed my calls. I regret not going back to the bridge at night to watch, to gather evidence, to do something other than walk past her every morning with my $5 and my clear conscience. I regret every single time I looked at her and saw a homeless woman instead of a hostage. I regret that it took her risking her life, reaching out to grab a stranger's hand and press a desperate note into it, for me to pay attention. She saved my life. That's the part people focus on. She grabbed my shirt and looked over my shoulder and gave me the half second I needed to draw and fire before the bullet hit me. She saved me. But I didn't save her. I still walk that route. Every morning. Under the Harmon Street overpass. The coffee can is gone. The cardboard is gone. Someone power washed the concrete where she used to sit, erasing the grime and the oil stains like they were cleaning a whiteboard. Like she'd never been there at all. I leave flowers. Every Monday. A small bundle of whatever's fresh at the bodega on Fleet Street. Carnations, usually. sometimes sunflowers when they have them. I set them against the base of the concrete pillar where she used to sit, and I stand there for a moment, and I think about a woman named Katerina who studied mathematics in Odessa and ended up under a bridge in Baltimore with no legs and a sign that said spare change for food. The flowers are always gone by the next morning. I don't know who takes them. Probably someone who needs the vase. Probably the wind. It doesn't matter. The gesture isn't for them. It's for her. And it's for me. It's my way of saying I'm sorry. It's my way of saying I see you now. It's my way of walking past that spot every single day and refusing to forget. But here's the thing that I haven't told anyone. The thing that keeps me checking over my shoulder. The thing that makes this story something I carry with me like a stone in my pocket, heavy and cold and impossible to set down. The detective told me the network operated with multiple operatives. The man I killed was one of at least 4. They arrested 2 others in the following weeks. The 4th was never identified. Never found. The detective said it was possible they'd fled the state. Possible they'd gone underground. Possible they were already dead, eliminated by their own people for letting the operation get compromised. Possible. But not certain. Some mornings, when I walk under the overpass, I get that feeling again. The cold one. The one at the back of my skull. The one my training taught me to trust. The one that says someone is watching. I stop. I scan the embankment. I check the sight lines, the shadows, the dead brush on the east side where someone once stood in the dark cataloging my habits and waiting for the right moment. There's never anyone there. But the feeling doesn't go away. Last week I found something at the base of the pillar. Tucked behind the flowers I'd left on Monday. A small square of paper, folded twice. My hands were shaking when I picked it up. I unfolded it slowly, expecting, I don't know what I was expecting. Cyrillic letters. A warning. A message from beyond whatever boundary separates the living from the dead. It was blank. Just a piece of paper. Probably trash. Probably nothing. But it was folded exactly the same way. I still walk that route. Every morning. I carry the Glock on my hip and flowers in my hand and guilt in my chest so heavy it makes it hard to breathe. I leave the flowers and I say her name, Katerina, and I listen to the wind move through the dead brush on the embankment, and I wonder if the sound I'm hearing is just the wind or if it's something else. Something watching. Something waiting. I was trained to spot threats. I was trained to read body language and trust the cold feeling at the back of my skull. And every morning, under that bridge, the cold feeling is there. It never left. If you're listening to this, and you walk past someone every day, someone sitting on a corner, someone under a bridge, someone the world has decided is invisible, look at them. Really look at them. Not with pity. Not with the self-congratulatory gaze of someone dropping a $5 bill into a coffee can. Look at their eyes. Read what's written there. Because maybe they're just cold and hungry and down on their luck. And maybe a few dollars will help them get through the day. But maybe, just maybe, they're trying to tell you something. Maybe they're screaming for help in a language you don't speak, in a silence you've learned to walk through without stopping. And maybe, if you look closely enough, if you pay attention, if you stop treating your morning commute like a treadmill and start treating it like what it actually is, a walk through a world full of people who are suffering in ways you can't imagine, maybe you'll see it in time. I didn't. Katerina Voloshin. 24 years old. Mathematics. Odessa. She deserved so much more than flowers. I still walk that route. Every morning. And every morning, just before I step out from under the shadow of the Harmon Street overpass and into the gray Baltimore light, I feel something brush against my chest. Right where she grabbed my shirt. Right where her frozen fingers twisted into the fabric and pulled me toward her and away from the bullet that was meant for the back of my head. It's probably the wind. It's probably nothing. But I don't think it's nothing. I think it's her. And I think she's still trying to warn me.